Hey everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our Diamond Heights playthrough, where I try and apply some of the real-life theme park design principles to scenario building. So we're going to pick up where we left off, which is trying to figure out what we can build into this space, and it's going to be an inverted coaster, specifically a B&M inverted coaster in the style of Nemesis, because we've got some terrain to work with. We're going to have to pretend just a little bit because we only have the two across trains, so I guess we could call it a Giovanola if we really wanted to, but we're gonna start with the corkscrew on top, as would be typical for that type of layout. One of the things that I do here, as well as most of the coasters that I build, is do the first kind of or major element first, and then kind of build backwards and forwards to encompass the whole thing. So I wanted the corkscrew there, and I wanted it on the ground, so that's what I started to build first, and then I built backwards for the main drop, and saw that there was a little bit of speed issue there, so that way we can adjust the lift hill to be just right. And then we'll dive down here with this loop right by the train tracks. It'd be kind of a cool visual for the train riders for sure. We could thread the loop by coming back through here, but I always feel like loop threading in general is very gimmicky unless it really works for the purposes of the ride. So in general, I try not to do it unless it just works very cleanly. And in this case, it didn't necessarily work as cleanly as it maybe could have otherwise. So we're going to put the station here on a curve on this side. We'll probably adjust the train again. As with the last video, you can definitely take shots on how many times the train gets closed in order to be modified for this whole thing. It's going to be quite a few more times to get everything right as we go along here. But we've come through with this helix here. We're going to roll into an inline or a zero-G roll, and now I'm trying to figure out how to work this around. So we're going to get rid of the brake run as it currently stands, and I figure, you know what, we can dive down underneath of the station. We do have to be cognizant of the 3 height clearances on this. The inverted coasters do have a larger clearance, and the suspended coaster, than the other coasters that are in the game. So you have to think through that a little bit, and it was particularly annoying through here, but we made it work. So we've got the one little section there diving under the station in a big trench, and the other one in a tunnel, which I think is kind of cool. And now we're trying to go back through around this train, which I closed. There's number 1 to get across the whole thing. So we're going to kind of go up and over to get into this thing, realizing that it's still just a little bit too low to work right there. But we want to do a final corkscrew. I figure 4 inversions works pretty well for this ride. So we'll have a corkscrew, or I guess a flat spin if you're talking an inverted coaster, a loop, a zero-G roll, and one more flat spin to end it. Now I was just trying to figure out how to end it. I said in the beginning of the first video that this map is particularly challenging as far as terrain goes, because I like to work with the terrain typically, but in some cases you just really have to kind of wholesale adjust it, and you can see that I had to cut away a large portion of the mountain for that first dive down to the loop. I'm going to have to do the same right here, but we'll do some terraforming to really smooth that out a little bit. As a real park, you probably wouldn't be rebuilding an entire mountain face unless you're like Marineland Canada, way back when they did Dragon Mountain, but in this instance, I feel like it's at least warranted to do a little bit of work here on the whole thing. So I'm trying to decide whether I put this in a tunnel or do it as a trench. And in the end, I think the trench is going to win out here. Just trying to deal with a little bit of funding as we get through to the end here. And thankfully it lines up pretty nicely so that we can have a nice little 4x4 curve, or 4x2 curve, I guess, around here, and then we can have our brake run. So we have our 2 brake runs. You want the space for the train to be held behind the station, and then one to slow the train down to a reasonable pace. So that works well for a 2-train operation, which is what we've got. So now I've got to finish messing with this train, so we'll get that all connected up and temporarily reconnected. I want to get rid of the station that's up on the top of the hill at some point, just because it's really obnoxious how far up that is. So we'll do a little bit of work on that here in the future. Now I'm doing a fair bit of terrain modification to the bottom of the valley here. I really don't like the train up on a trestle the whole way across, so we're going to raise that up so it actually sits on the ground, and I think it just looks a little cleaner in general. Gives it a little more space to work with down there. Here's where I decided to take that out of the tunnel and put it into a trench, and now we're going to lower some of the land around it to just kind of mitigate the amount of trench going on. It just looks a little better in my opinion as far as that goes. And then we'll clean up a bit of this here and there just so that we can smooth this whole thing out just a little bit. I am pretty happy with how this layout turned out. I have not done an inverted coaster layout for a long time in both RCT2 or RCT1 really, besides just kind of screwing around with general layouts. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Stats are okay. If I remember right, it was high, very high, and high, maybe. I don't recall, but I'll show in the time lapse or in the real time portion at the end, so you can see all of that. Now comes the hard part, is routing the queue and the exit through here. So I really don't tend to plan these ahead of time unless it's one of those things where I have a really key interaction point. But in this instance, I'm kind of left with not a lot of options, and we're going to close the railroad again there to push it over by 1. So now I can at least get down onto the ground near the railroad and trying to figure out which way to go, whether I want to go kind of underneath this route to the lift hill, or if I want to go over towards the Black Schwarzkopf coaster there and go up that way. Because right now we're still sort of up in the air as to which way it wants to go. But in the end, I chose back towards the Wooden Wild Mouse. I'm going to dip down here and go underneath of the coaster as well. So this will be nice because it gives us a little bit of loose article protection there as we cross underneath the track with a tunnel rather than just open track. So that will work a little bit there. Exit pathway was a little bit more challenging initially. I just couldn't get anything to work quite right until I found out you could just go up and over. So another instance of kind of a layout that helps a little bit with that. And then we have our plaza that we're putting here together underneath that Schwarzkopf helix, which would be kind of a cool interaction, I think. It's not quite my favorite because I don't like moving around the supports, but it'll work. I think that'll be just fine. Our queue for the inverted coaster is a little much. It's definitely longer than it might otherwise be, but it gets to where it needs to be. So here we're going to go back through and put the specific pathway areas for our handymen because I hadn't quite realized just how bad the litter and vandalism had gotten. It was fairly poor, really being driven largely by the Wooden Wild Mouse, which is fairly high nausea, I believe, and just kind of spread to the rest of it. So I hadn't really paid much attention to it, and that was not so good as far as that goes, but there's a lot of mess right there that we're going to have to fix up at some point here. But now to connect this pathway over, it is a dead end. I don't like dead ends, but in this instance it's probably okay just because it acts as a little bit of a spur and it brings guests up here. And at least there's a plaza to work with as well. With the block brakes, we could have run 3 trains, but realistically that doesn't make sense because we would need a whole other brake run, and really you need a mid-course brake to effectively run 3 trains anyways on a situation like this, so we're going to avoid that on the whole. I'm using the rusty pipes sidewalls on this area just because I feel like it kind of fits this theme a little bit better. And this theme, I guess, is sort of, I don't know, generic industrial type thing going on. It's based on Nemesis, so a similar feel to that. We don't have a giant monster roaming about, but at the same time, it does. It still works okay. So we're gonna go through here, and as you can see, do some pretty wholesale modifications to the landscape. I am going to put some rock in here and then change some of the textures to sand underneath of the coaster. One of the things that I find is I really don't like grassland texture butting up against sand texture. I always like to transition out of it from the sand to the dirt and grass and then to the grass. Really, it's just a cleanliness thing for me, and I think it makes a lot more sense to go that direction. So I think that's probably the right move. Go back through here and fix up all of our vandalism because there's quite a bit of it, and get through that. But now we have another coaster running, and we can get this opened up and going for the guests. Go through, put some fencing in here. I'm using the mesh, the post and the mesh fence. I just think it looks good in general as far as that goes. And a little bit more of this terraforming just to get the whole thing to look right. I tried to build these like little rock outcroppings to come up and around, and on the whole, it worked out okay. So now we're going to jump over here to our other coaster, and I know we made a little bit of a skip there, but jumping here to the bobsled coaster, which we didn't have a lot of options to work with, but I thought the bobsled could be an interesting type. You don't build them very often just because they're terribly limited in RCT. You really don't have a lot of options in general with this whole thing, just because there's no diagonals and there's really not a lot of elements like you have in, say, Parkitect, for example. That's got a great log or bobsled builder. But we're gonna go in the style of some of the mock bobsleds, like the one at Europa Park or like the one at King's Dominion, where we've got a little helix and a bit of a drop to begin with, a mid-course break, and then a secondary elements, or a second half, I guess. It's going to allow us to run 3 trains, not that we really need it, but I feel like it works in this instance as well, and it gives me an excuse to manage the speed a little bit, because if you have any kind of decent hill on these bobsleds, sometimes you do end up with a ton of speed at the bottom that's a little hard to scrub off. So the layout on this one's a little bit challenging. I'm kind of going non-traditional because usually you can just slalom back and forth all the way down to the bottom, do a couple of helixes, maybe one down, maybe one up, and it works all right in the end. But in this instance, I wanted to do at least something a little more creative, such as cross the drop in that one section. So that's really what was pushing me to do this whole darn thing. Knowing here that the train's going to have to move again because it is in the way. And granted, I don't like the hills to begin with, but I'm really trying to figure out the best way to do this. At one point here, I was looking at stacking these helixes. Like other coasters, you can save on supports if you just stack the whole thing here. And with the helix elements on this type of ride, it actually kind of looks nice sometimes, I think, if you do stack it, but in this instance it just didn't really work. I mean, obviously the train was in the way, but it really wasn't a good look in my opinion, so I kind of went back to how I had it initially. But this is part of the challenge of building good realistic coasters in a scenario setting. You've got a little more space to work with than, or a little less space to work with than you might have in more of a sandbox type location, and it can be a bit challenging sometimes to fit a full-size realistic coaster into some of these spaces. So we're kind of working through that. Now that we've cleared out the train through that whole space, we can really try and build things a little better here. I was still on this helix option underneath of the original helix, but eventually just realized it just wasn't going to work, so we went back through and went back the other way here. And just trying to do quick directional changes. Typically what you want to do is really run this layout purely through corners. You don't want a lot of drops, you don't want to climb, you don't want anything else except for maybe that initial climb rate I have right there where you drop and then you come right back up about the same amount of height. If you do a mid-course brake run, you want it to be at least as long as the train or just about the same length. So just to make sure you got enough space to stop the thing. I mean, granted, you could stop it on one tile in RCT, but just realistically, you want it to be the length of the train. So trying to figure out how to end it here, I really didn't like how far it was going to stick out over top of the water. So I played around with a couple of different options that ended up using some additional kind of more interesting geometry here towards the tail end of the layout. But just couldn't get anything that worked quite right with clearances and getting over top of things. So in the end, what we did is curve right here, and then go around with a turn into the brakes right here. My brake run is going to be a little too short as far as realistically it goes. I think I was kind of over it at this point, so I didn't want to waste more in-game scenario time since we were fighting against the clock to get our $200,000 in park value. But it was a little bit of a short brake run as far as that goes, but in the end it didn't go too badly. I think given more space, I probably would have wanted another probably half as much total brake space there. So I come back through here and lowered the train, run it underneath the ground through this area just so I've kind of cleared it out from being around the coaster itself. We're actually going to end up moving it one more time still for the pathway here, but while I was on that, I thought, well, why don't I close the coaster, give it a little bit of a tunnel element as well, just because it was sitting on some kind of flat ground and everything else here has been relatively terrained. So we were going to give it a little bit of more I don't know, thematic freedom here a little bit. We're going to drop in some of these rocks, more of that sand texture, and then a lot of these conifers and rough green, the dark green bushes, which to me is kind of an every theme sort of thing. I'm messing a little bit in the tile inspector here, just changing out the platforms that show up when you're just on the edge of the tile right there. Just an easy visual cleanup as far as that goes. One of the challenges that we run into here is how to connect this path to this ride, because there's really not a lot of close options to do so. And I want to loop, so it's one of those things where I really don't have a ton of ability to do too much right now with it. So what we're going to do first is build our exit and build our entrance. We start by putting the exit on this side and trying to kind of thread everything through the space. What I'm realizing now as I build this is that it actually is making a much better queue through this area, because my exit was having to go a fair bit of a way to get out from around the coaster, so naturally it fit a little bit better as a queue. So we'll eventually make that shift as we do that. So going around trying to find a good spot here, also reducing some prices, people will ride some things, and trying to keep that whole park going as we go about it. But really, you gotta bite the bullet at some point. You gotta make a really long pathway. And the first thing I did was come out like this, go up adjacent to the train, make sort of a shared bridge coming across the water, just like that. And here's kind of where I realized that, hey, maybe it would be better if I swapped this, and we're gonna turn that into the queue on that side. The brake or the exit pathway can go on this side, just with a little bit of landscape modification, and we'll add a little bit of terrain here to the map. And I think that looks okay. Just clean it up a little bit on the coastline as far as that goes, and then we have a nice little exit path that runs down the whole thing. Use some of those wood walls and some of the mesh walls again as well. Dirt and grass texture, which is a big fan of that one, and then the wood sidewalls as well. So we're kind of using the trifecta of pathway fences that I really tend to use a lot. So little post and rope, the post and mesh, and the wood fence. And those, if you throw in the hedge, those are probably the 4 most useful fences in my opinion as far as that goes. So now looking at a way to make this into a loop, we're going to go ahead and raise this section of land just to give ourselves a little bit of a plaza right here, because we really don't have a lot of that. It's all very much raised up on stilts all the way along this whole space. And it is finally time to close the train once again and relocate this railroad and let us bring this pathway in. So we'll want to do that, and then also try and get rid of that sort of unsightly diagonal climb there. So I have a little bit of space here that I can climb up by 1 tile in the tunnel, come out 2 off the water, and build in just right alongside the landscape here, and create a nice little space here for our pathway to slide on through. So we'll cross the wooden coaster at the same place, over top of right there where it dives into the tunnel, and underneath of on the other side. So it makes for a nice little interactive area as far as that goes. Drop 2 little pieces inside the tunnel there as well. So now we at least have a train that gives the appearance of being flat, even though we do make some slight elevation changes inside the tunnels. I thought this would be kind of a fun crossover move right here, going over the tunnel for the bobsled itself. Also lets us connect the queue up there too. Add our fencing throughout here, just anywhere that we've got a vertical face. You just want to keep that covered the whole way. By no means do we really need fences along every single pathway, although I almost always get the urge to do so. But we definitely want to protect against fall risk and things like that. So now we're gonna do a little bit more landscaping along here. I'm gonna build up the pathways, just do some of the wood texturing there as well, some of the fencing too, and just clean it up, make it look a little more permanent and a little more intentionally built, I suppose. And also take this little plaza here and drop some flowers into it, and just dress it up a little bit as well. So now we have 3 loops in the park, which is pretty good. I think that's really what we were going for initially. We've got the first loop that goes from the wooden coaster back towards the home entrance exit with the log flume, as well as this loop that goes over here towards the bobsled. And then we have the other loop that goes over top of the 2 Schwarzkopf coasters and around via our haunted house. So our coverage is pretty good here as far as pathways go, and I think in general we've really touched the main places that we want the pathway to go. So on the whole, we're doing alright as far as this goes, and actually we're not too far from winning the scenario at this point, but there are still some things that I want to clean up, so we're going to continue to do that. Firstly, coming through here, changing some land texture, dropping in some trees and things like that. It is pretty barren on this side because we did level out a lot of the trees while we were kind of screwing with this whole area just to make it viable to build on, so I do want to bring that back just a little bit through the whole thing. And we can see now that the inverted coaster is a little bit of a disaster from a throw up standpoint, so gotta give that whole area its own handyman to deal with the whole darn thing. One of the suggestions in chat was to put some water spouts there by the brake run for the bobsled. I thought that was a cool idea. It makes it look nice and gives you a little bit of cool interactivity as you come through the brake run on the bobsled itself. So we're still looking at this train station up there. We're going to eventually move it, but not right this instant. It's in the way, and it's just kind of annoying. One of the things that was pointed out to me here is that by building that pathway, I had cut off all those supports on the black Schwarzkopf coaster. So we bump it out by 1 right there just to bring those back. I do think it's important, even though visually, or even though physically the coaster is still going to stand up, if you put stuff underneath of all the supports, it just doesn't look good. You know, I think really, as best as we can, really want to keep a lot of the supports viable so it looks like the thing could possibly exist and stand properly. So what we're going to do here is build ourselves a dual set of SNS towers. We're going to shift the one off just by a little bit. I feel like that ends up looking kind of nice because it keeps it in less of an orthogonal pattern, and we're continually trying to break the grid. Every time you break the grid with diagonal track or things like that, it just looks good because it just gets away from the whole squareness of the whole map. So we're going to offset it by just 1 there, and then we're going to put 2 queues in there that kind of go side by side, so we at least have sort of 1 collective entrance for the whole thing. So one of these is going to be a shot tower, one of them is going to be a drop tower. I feel like that's usually the best way to go about it. I'm going to go with the white for the tower itself, same with the white and gray checkerboard on the bottom, and then we'll do one of the air tubes in blue and one of the air tubes in red. I like the rusty pipe for the sidewalls here, and then we're going to go through and drop a whole bunch of those bushes in as well, and just kind of clean up this area since we did just kind of swipe the whole top of this mountain off in kind of one little swoop here. But I think it ends up looking better in this instance, and it is less walkway in general to go up the giant hill, so that's a win for me in general. So I think it was good to flatten that out just a little bit as far as that goes, and I think it looks better overall. So that gives us two flat rides, 2 tower rides right there in total, and I think that looks very nice. We do want to clean up a little bit of this landscaping because I did kind of just go through here with a bit of a machete and try and chop down a lot of the stuff. So try and make it look a little more realistic by just dropping some things in there. But there's our win. We did reach our $200,000 park value, and that's always a good thing. With a little bit to spare, we were probably closer than we maybe should have been. If I would have spent more time focusing on building new stuff than I did reworking some of the existing stuff, then I probably would have been in better shape. But you know, I wasn't just really happy with how how some of the existing stuff was set up. So I'm still going to stand behind my decision to do a lot of those adjustments. I put a little square here as well because this is where a lot of the pathways come together. So I figured it would make a lot more sense if I just made a little square path, kept our pizza stand there, put a fountain in the middle, and made sure that I wasn't deleting too many of those supports on the lift hill of the Schwarzkopf coaster. Just also coming back through here with a lot of these bushes and landscape changes, just because it really does help bring the space together. Just it feels more detailed, feels more lived in, I suppose, and in general, I think it just looks correct. So one of the things that I'm finally doing here that I had not done prior is modifying this ride to have block brakes. The white one did close. I guess that one's agoraphobia. It's fear of open spaces. And that one had crashed and killed some people, which I kind of remembered it happening before. I wasn't really paying attention to it. Thankfully, it had very little to do with our park rating, and was fine in the end. But it was high time that we got rid of the continuous circuit mode anyways, just because I don't really like that mode to begin with, and went ahead and started to modify these to have block section mode. So really all that means is just putting in an extra brake run at the end, and getting rid of some of that long station. So the black one was easy. Claustrophobia was very simple to modify. Agoraphobia less so, because I needed to have a longer brake run on this one just because there really wasn't enough space. So that required me to back it up a little further than I wanted it to go, and now I'm trying to get it to reconnect back to the existing track, which I've done here by modifying one of the pathways and working our way around the shot tower. And now I've got to modify these couple little airtime hills that go over this side of the hill, which I always thought these were kind of iconic, and I really didn't want to get too fancy with changing up those sort of smooth hills. So more or less it's the same. It's not quite my favorite solution for it, but I think it works okay. So now we're coming back through here, doing a little bit more landscape modification throughout, just trying to clean up everything and put some fencing in, and just kind of button up the park. You know, you could build on this park for ages and ages and ages, because it is a large park. It needs a lot of work, and to fill out the whole space, it does take some time. So I'm kind of okay with just kind of calling it at some point, but I do want to finish up at least the primary goals. And one of the last of the primary goals here was getting rid of the train station up top. So I was just going to get rid of it entirely and just kind of connect it across, which we did here briefly, and then I thought a little longer about it and said, you know, it really does make sense that we do need a station over here, because there are 3 stations on the train, and if we took out this one, then it would really make the layout a bit lopsided, which isn't necessarily a problem. There's definitely trains in real life that have that issue, but in this instance, I wanted to go ahead and see if I could put back this train station. So one of the suggestions on Discord, right when I was trying to figure it out myself as well, is could we turn it right here, go parallel to this wild mouse, and then come out along the water? And I think yes. So the one challenge we have is there's a big knot of pathway right in the middle here, and that becomes a bit of a challenge, because what I hate is up and over pathways just for the sake of going up and over the railroad. And yes, I know that RCT, Open RCT does allow level crossings now. I didn't want to really do that. I'm trying to avoid those sorts of new features in that instance, which I know is a little bit hypocritical since we've been doing the diagonal brake runs. But you know what? I'm going to stick by my decision anyway. And we do come out of the tunnel there, and now it's just a matter of getting it connected from point A to point B with the pathway and everything. I noticed here that the synchronization on the coasters wasn't really lining up just right, so I had to put sort of a dummy block at the very end of the brake run so it would clear that sooner and free up the lift hill space, which it did, and now that ride runs just fine as far as that's going. So what I've done here is just disconnected the pathway up to the wooden wild mouse and put a little turn here underneath of the wild mouse track, which I think looks pretty good as far as that interactivity goes. At this point, we are still thinking about skipping the station on this side and just kind of coming through along the water as best as we can, but the more I look at this, the more I realize that we do need some kind of a station through here. But for right now, we're trying to modify the landscaping without just entirely taking out the whole hill, which is kind of what we did for the invert, but I don't want to avoid or do that entire thing again. Realizing here, however, that if I do take out the whole hill and lower the thing down, then I get out of then I accidentally knock out the lift or looping supports, and we really don't want to do that since those are pretty iconic, and it's going to look really stupid if those are missing. So we skip ahead here to when we did finally figure out, after a lot of back and forth, how to put a station in there, which did do, and get that to fit in the whole space. And now trying to route the pathway around the whole thing, that was a key element there. So we have this pretty cool interactive path now that goes underneath the two loops. Should probably have some loose article netting under there, but you know what? It's probably going to be just fine. I think we'll be all right. Hopefully the people will not carry their phones and keys and everything on the coaster. We'll hope for the best, I guess. So now we're into the final stages of just kind of polishing up and cleaning up a little bit to really give ourselves a final finished park. We've got some more of the trees that we're sticking in there. I did make that pathway by the water or over the water towards the bobsled diagonal. It does pop out one there to avoid a support, but I'd rather have it look non-symmetrical and pop out to miss a support that would otherwise be deleted than to keep it there and get rid of the support. So for the most part, this is done on that side, besides, you know, just a little bit of cleanliness elements there and everything throughout. We did do this kind of nice little walkway down to the water here, and I'm going to put some additional fencing throughout this whole space and clean that up as well. This does get into maybe a little bit much fencing in terms of the post and rope. There's really no reason for it around those center planters, I suppose. You know, even with the topiaries there, it really, you know, be more of a curb or something that might look better. We just don't really have that option. Seeing that our handymen have not really kept up their duties here, we're going to go ahead and replace all these until I immediately rethink this and delete all of this, because I did want to continue the height of the causeway that goes across there and bring it across at that same height, then drop down to pretty much just the level of the landscaping right here. So now I need to clear out this other pathway down there, so I'll leave that for a minute while I go over here and do a little more cleanliness. And here we go, connecting it back up in, and then I can kind of slowly get rid of this those last little bits right there. And now I think the pathway just looks a little more clean in general, and kind of works out pretty okay as far as that goes. So that's going to about do it for Diamond Heights. We are just wrapping up a little bit of finishing touches right here. Just trying to close out everything. You know, we could keep building for quite a while, but we're going to call it a day right here. I think in the end we did pretty okay. A couple original coasters, and really cleaned up a lot of the things that I wasn't happy with within the park itself. So I think we'll leave it here and jump over to the real-time portion so we can check out the park in a little bit more detail. Thanks very much. And here we are at our completed Diamond Heights Park. I say completed, but we could definitely keep on building if we really wanted to, but completed as far as we won the scenario, and we're doing pretty good now. Let's see what we won by. We were required to get 200,000 park value. We got 234, which isn't a lot more, but you know, at the same time, I wasn't necessarily needing to crush the goal. I think I spent more time doing rework on existing attractions than building new ones, which, you know, in the end, that's probably okay in my book as long as we won. So first off, let's just take a spin around the park. We have our train here, the Indiana Jane Railroad, that we've relatively kept in place, although we've spent a lot of time getting rid of hills and lowering the whole thing down. If you remember right, this train came out of this tunnel up here on the original layout. We've dropped it down so we don't have to deal with quite as many hills. We have a nice little entrance feature in here as you come in, nice little square, drop down to the little info kiosk, and then we have this sort of nice little walkway down to the bridge across to the rest of the park. Over on this side on the spur, we do have our car ride right here that dips down below the train, or adjacent to the train, and then has a little bit of tunnel action going on throughout the whole space. I probably could have done even more car rides here, or done a little bit of a longer one, but I feel like this is a pretty good good addition for that space. We spin right around and look at Snake River Falls here. We did do a fair bit of modification to this. As you might recall, the station used to start on the top here. We extended it by one, and now it drops down at the end of the ride, end-ish. There's still a lift hill back to the station here, but we do still get a drop right out of the station as well. I do like the queue here as it sort of wraps around and kind of works its way down, and then back up into the entrance as well. Crossing over to the next section, we do see the issue here where we ran into with the boat hire. Not entirely sure what's causing this, but the bumper boats love to congregate right here. I guess it must be a wayfinding thing to get back potentially, but anyway, it's not really working out. We have our swinging ship here that probably is contributing to that problem with a little bit of theming around it, and I think that turned out kind of okay. But let's pick up on arachnophobia here, which, if you recall, used to have a spiral lift here. This used to be the height of this second hill. Now it's the first hill, so it's a little bit shorter than it was before. We did retain this initial drop through the tunnel, and then we did our own things. We drop underneath this train bridge, wrap around, and kind of just meander. This was based off of the Zero Tivoli custom layouts that you see in a lot of malls, and the speed is not meant to be very high. I mean, as you can see, it's kind of creeping around the layout in a lot of cases, but for the most part, that's really what we're going for, is just sort of a slow, easy ride around. And I think you can see it's relatively reflected in the stats. It's still listed as high because we do have these couple of diving corners here, but on the whole, it's fine. So high, medium, which works fine for me. I don't usually pay attention to stats, so I think it's okay. We have our haunted house that we have built back here on the dueling coasters. I didn't really adjust these very much because I didn't necessarily want to. They were more or less fine as they are without any kind of like major wholesale changes. We did add the block brakes to the back, and then I modified the end of agoraphobia here, which is okay. I don't necessarily like the diving corner at the end here, but it works and it gets the job done, which is what we really needed it to do. A little bit more train modification back here as well. And then coming across, we have our scrambler and the little island that we expanded and added some more land here for our little plaza. Wrapping around to our wooden coaster here, which we did end up naming Zipper Dipper, which is one of the suggestions in chat. As always, feel free to give me some post-park naming suggestions if you'd like. Always happy to go back through and name them afterwards. But we have our little CCI-ish layout here. Pretty well terrain following. Get that nice little crossover there underneath the lift hill, a double down, and then this kind of Raven, maybe Hercules style drop here over the water. Nice little dive underneath the pathway and the train. And then this crossover at the end into the brakes. All told, not too bad. High, medium again, which is, I can't be upset with that. I think it works just fine. I wish I would have spent a little bit more time on the train here, just making this turn wider. I don't like small turns on the train. It just doesn't work for me, especially at the speed the train's going. It just doesn't look good. But we did, by modifying the log flume, create a new loop of path all the way around back to the little spiral slide that's right here. Cross over to this side and we get to our bobsled, which we didn't end up naming on this one. It's okay. I'm not totally in love with it by any means, because it's a very non-traditional layout, which I'm okay with. I do like a good non-traditional layout, and bobsleds are kind of a pain in the butt to do in RCT just because of the limited track pieces. The brake runs are way too short, fully acknowledged. That's the biggest issue that I have with this ride. I really needed a little bit more space to work with, but on the whole, I think it's okay. I do like this crossover here where it drops underneath and then comes back up in the first section. I think that turned out pretty okay, and I'm relatively happy with that. Then around here, and we have our train modifications that we had made with previously where the train would go up here to the station way up on top, which was just not cool with me. Now we cut underneath, go under the coaster, and then have a station right here. Have our nice little diagonal pathway here, which we bumped out to avoid that support because it's important to have visual supports, in my opinion. And there's our train station, half underground and half above ground. And then it ducks back underneath and then comes out over here, getting to the next station. Kept our Wooden Wild Mouse pretty much as is, no real changes there. I did modify the pathways to and from it, so we now have the pathway that was going over this way before, and then we have a new one which goes underneath the loops, and I think turns out really cool. I do like this this spot for just picturing myself standing underneath there, looking up at the loops on the Schwarzkopfs. I think that's a pretty cool look in general for that one. Finally, back here we have our inverted coaster, our Nemesis-esque inverted coaster. I'm pretty happy with this one. I think it turned out pretty well. So we've got a 2-train operation, 4 inversions, 2 flat spins, a loop, and a 0G roll, and a fair bit of interaction through the whole thing, I think. Starting with the corkscrew slash or flat spin, I suppose, if you want to call it that. We have a nice little lift hill into this first element. I think it's taken at a reasonable pace, as it turns out. So here we go into that element there. We have our loop. Feels the correct pace. A nice little turnaround here. Into the 0G roll. Maybe, well, not too bad through the 0G. Diving under the station. Through the tunnel. Up and over. Another flat spin. And into the brakes. Good interaction, I think, with the train going underneath. We did get rid of some of that valley to put the train basically on the ground, which I'm pretty happy with. We also have the tunnel for coaster down here as it dives underneath the station. Queue that kind of wraps around. It's a little bit of a long, windy queue, but that's okay. I think in general it's fine. And this plaza is sort of neat because you've got the helix for this coaster up ahead, or up over top. That's a bit of a weird helix element anyway, but these coasters are a little bit odd to begin with as well. But that's really it. If we look at the stats for this one, very high, and high, which is really what I would have expected. Not upset with that by any means. So I think it works out okay. There's still a little bit of space we could definitely build in. We could certainly put something on the top of the hill here by arachnophobia. We could certainly build on the top of the hill here by agoraphobia. And now that we remove the train station on top here, there's definitely space to do something up here as well. But since we've accomplished the goal, we're gonna put it to bed on this one. There's also space even over here. There's still more that I would gladly have done, and perhaps that's something that we revisit later on. But for the most part, that's it. So hopefully you enjoyed this video today, and let me know what you think about the 4 times speed versus the 6 times speed. Hopefully 4 is slow enough. I think it is. I'm not sure I want to go too much slower because we're already well over an hour for just the 3-year scenario, and we'll see where that all lands. Next up is Evergreen Gardens, so that's exciting, and hopefully you can catch me on stream for that one, twitch.tv/Amusement Academy, and you can find all of the various links below. So until next time, thank you all very much for watching, and have a great day. See you later.